Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Let's turn into our Torah portion. We have a double portion today, and it comes to us from the end of the book of Vayikra, the end of Leviticus, and it comes to us from chapter 25 and verse 1, extending through chapter 27 and verse 34. It's entitled Becha and Bechukotai. Bechukotai. There's much I want to talk about today. Much I want to talk about today in the context of the blessings and the cursings that we see as we come to an end of the book of Vayikra. Because I truly believe that today we are a people that are living in a very, very special age. I truly do. It says in the Dead Sea Scrolls that when the scrolls come up out of the ground, that they will speak to that generation. And that will be the last generation that will heed the call of the teacher of righteousness, Moreh Zadik, the Malkit Zadok, and they will turn back to his covenant. I do believe that we are that generation. We are the generation that has seen and witnessed the scrolls come up out of the ground. We need to understand the blessings, and we need to understand the cursings. And we need to make a choice. Just as when Yeshua sowed the word, the seed, and it fell on good ground, that good ground, when that word, that seed falls on believers, some believers are going to produce 30-fold. Some believers are going to take it a stage further. And they're going to believe they're going to produce 60-fold. But you know what? There's going to be a group of believers that when the word penetrates the ground that they are, because you are from what? The ground, the dust, that you are going to produce 100-fold. I believe that the 100-fold community in the time of Yeshua was the community in Qumran. That Yeshua was that teacher of righteousness that left Qumran and went up to the Jerusalem, that 30-fold community. And he spoke a 100-fold message. And there were some that heard and some that didn't. Today, I believe we are in that very same realm. The realm that Yeshua lived in was a political Israel. A political Israel, and that was the 30-fold community. But Yeshua was from a different Israel, the Israel of Eloah that Paul speaks about in Galatians. That's the 100-fold message, and that's what I want to talk about today. If you think that Yeshua has saved you so that you can live a life of blessing and cursing, then you are in the 30, 60-fold life, my friends. But if you know that Yeshua has brought you to this life that you have, and who knows how long we have left, if you believe that he has brought you to this life that you now have to produce the 100-fold Zadik life, then this message for you, because it's a message of pure blessings. He did not bring us into cursings and blessings, but he brought us a life of pure blessings, if you have the ears to hear. Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. For as many as are followers of the works of the law, this is speaking of the book of the law, are under the curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone that continues not in all things that are written in the book of the law to do them. And when Torah teachers and teachers speak about Galatians and they try and make this about the written or oral law, juxtaposing the written law against the oral law, they are making it up. Because it says by name what the context of Galatians is about. It is about a position between two covenants. It is about the book of the law and the book of the covenant. It is about a covenant that Yahweh made with his people and they broke. And then it is talking about an imposed law. And it's named right here in Galatians chapter 3, verse 10. We don't have to try and make it up that this is about some man-made doctrine. This is Yahweh speaking through his servants to his people. Because if we're going to enjoy the land and all of Yahweh's promises, How are we going to enjoy that? Only if we are faithful to the covenant, not to the book of the law, because in the covenant there is only one limited family curse. But in the book of the law are all of the curses, plural. There are no curses in the book of the covenant. There is one limited family curse, the fifth commandment. But there are no curses, plural, in the book of the covenant. The curses belong and are in the imposed law. Do you believe that Yeshua delivered you so that you could be a part of curses or blessing? It's about blessing. It's about blessing. When we broke the book of the covenant, we were put under the book of the law, which was the schoolmaster, and we were given ample time until the seed should come, who would scatter that seed on the ground to see who would produce 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. And when those scrolls came up out of the ground, that's when you start to see, measure for measure, who's producing what. The message that I'm about to share today is a 100-fold message. I understand that there are a lot of people that will disagree with everything that I say today, and that is okay. That's a 60-fold, that's a 30-fold, or that's an unbeliever. But there are a few of you out there and in here that have the kingdom ear. The kingdom ear to be able to discern and rightly divide the word of truth. There's 13 blessings, 13 verses of blessings in our text, verses 32 verses of cursings. 13 verses of blessings, verses 32 verses worth of cursings. You see, the blessings are without limit, but the curses are very specific and they are limited. They are limited and will only last until the time of reformation, when the seed shall come who shall sow that seed on good ground to see what you will produce in your life of faith. That's where we're living right now. And then if we make the teshuvah, we become that 100-fold Melchizedek priesthood. And we can re-enter a new covenant. It's not just enough to make teshuvah. We have to do what? Re-enter the covenant and start to produce 100-fold in our life. Or we're going to let that word fall on us and we'll opt for the Mishnah. And we'll opt for a life of curses and blessings. And we'll try and regurgitate 19th century covenant theology and throw a few Hebrewisms in there and a little bit of paleo, and we'll all go trotting along up to the Temple Mount. That's not for the 100-fold. I have those same books in my library at home. I'm not going to be duped when somebody reteaches 19th century covenant theology and then rebrands it with a little bit of paleo, a little bit of Hebrew, a little bit of Mishnah, and tries to sell everybody that it's something new. It ain't. I got the same library at home. I'm reading the same stuff. This is a message, the same message, Ecclesiastics, there is nothing new under the sun. This is the same message that the teacher of righteousness and those that were the 100-fold community in Yeshua's time were listening to and walking in. That's why it's recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's why we're the generation that's got to witness them coming up out of the ground. I truly believe that. Can anyone even see where I'm coming from and is in somewhat agreement with me? The Dead Sea Scrolls confirm my suspicion that the time has come. That the time has come. It's today. It is today. But just like back then, Israel, the Jews, and today we've got Messianic Judaism, is doing their best to sidestep or just plain cover up the truth at very worst. I don't understand it. But there is a conspiracy going on. Something is afoot. Something is afoot. Let me read from you manuscript 1QSA to 1Q28A. And this is titled, The Charter for Israel in the Last Days. The Charter for Israel in the Last Days. Do you think that's got anything to do with you and I? I sure do. Because we are the Israel of Eloah, Galatians says. And this is what it says, quote, "This is the rule for all the congregation of Israel in the last days, when they are mobilized to join the Yachad." That means the holy community. "They must live by the law of the sons of Zadok, the priests and the men of their covenant, who cease to walk in the way of the people." How were the people walking? They were walking in the curses of the book of the law. That was the Jerusalem of Paul's day, yet there is a Jerusalem from above, which is how the teacher of righteousness was living and communicating to them. It goes on to say, "These same are the men of his counsel who kept his covenant during evil times and so were covered." We are being called that very same message. This is a charter to Israel in the very last days because the scrolls have come up out of the ground. And it's a calling that you are to live as the Melchizedek priests lived, and you are to return to the covenant. And that will be your protection, your covering during the evil days that are about to come upon you. It's the holiness code of your life. That is what is a 100-fold lifestyle. It's the refiner's fire within yourself producing 100-fold as the word, the seed has come and is now sowing that seed on good ground, and you'll produce 30, no, 60, no, 100-fold. Manuscript 11Q13 is the coming of the Melchizedek. Now, in this manuscript, Melchizedek is associated with the Sabbath and the Sabbath land rest. What is this week's Torah portion about? It's about the Sabbath land rest, and the Yovel, the Jubilee. Everything in the manuscript of manuscript 11Q13, which is the Melchizedek manuscript, is all associated with the Melchizedek returning to set his people free at the Jubilee. So our freedom is associated with the calendar. Yes, it's come to that time. I'm going to have to address that, but that won't be this week, but it's going to be next week. I have to, because I believe we don't have time to mess around. So, it is that time. It all comes in his time. And I tell you, when I do address the calendar, it's not going to be from a dogmatic position, because I am not dogmatic, because I don't know. But I'll tell you where I'm at, and some of you may be in the same place and others won't. But I have not got the calendar figured out. And I'm proud to say that. I truly am. Because when it becomes dogmatic, there's no room for growth. There's no room for growth, there's no room for discourse, and there's no room for people to come to prayer and realize that it is an ongoing revelation that is not in the hands of men, but it is in the hands of the Melchizedek himself. But sometimes you have to come so that you can see. And I just am tired of doing the Hillel, because I know there's nothing there for me to see. So I have to take a step. And I hope some of you will be ready to take that step with me. And I'm not saying it's going to be 100% tacked on the right course, but we can adjust as we go along, right? That's truly what the faithful will be seeing. We won't be dogmatic. I spent too many years being dogmatic on the calendar, and it isn't a good place. It's full of pride, and it's full of people arguing. I'm glad to be in a place of shalom to be able to address it so that we can grow together. Manuscripts 11Q13, the coming of Melchizedek, like I said, is associated with the calendar and the Jubilee, the Yovel, the final land redemption, because the Melchizedek declares that the Jubilee year remission of debts is not only connected to matters of money, but to the forgiveness of sin and the release from a slave system. Who wants to be released from a slave system? Right? We need to be released from the slave system. And that's what the Melchizedek manuscripts within the Dead Sea Scrolls communicate to us. Melchizedek being the agent of salvation himself. This is what it says, quote, Manuscript 11Q13. Your Elohim is Melchizedek. In fact, Melchizedek is a divine being, and the tetranamogram, the Yod He Vav He, is replaced with Melchizedek, with the title Melchizedek. Your Elohim is Melchizedek, who will deliver them from the power of Belial, Satan. Concerning what Scripture says, then you shall have the trumpet sounded loud in the 7th month, quoting this week's Torah portion, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 9. It continues to go on. You see, Melchizedek is this enormous, exalted, divine being to whom are applied the names that are reserved for Yahweh alone. His holy name. Melchizedek is even substituted for the divine name Yahweh in the Isaiah 61 verse 2 quotation, which is what Yeshua read before those in the synagogue when they wanted to run him out. He stood up as the Melchizedek, proclaiming himself as the divine, just as is in line with the Dead Sea Scrolls and Manuscript 11Q13. Melchizedek is the anointing one, connecting to Mashiach, who was coming and delivering a divine message, and then he would have to die and be cut off, just as it says in Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, Daniel's timeline. You see, there was a scroll. There's a bloody cover-up. There is. There was a scroll that was found in 1952 in Cave 3. A man by the name of John Allegro oversaw the cutting of this scroll, and it's come to be known today, many of you know, as the Copper Scroll. He oversaw the cutting of the scroll, and he cut them into 23 strips between 1955 and 1956. Now, Allegro transcribed their context immediately, and he drew the conclusion that the sect in Qumran, whoever they were the matrix of Christianity. The very matrix of Christianity. You see, there's a cover-up. And I'm going to step out on a limb, and I'm going to say that there is a Israeli cover-up. And the Israeli cover-up is what's concerning what's going on in Cave 7. That's what I want to know, is what's going on in Cave 7 and how come it hasn't been published. Do you realize it's people like Robert Eisenman that had really pushed so hard in the 90s to get these manuscripts published, because they were held for years and years by a select few. And finally, scholars started to say, no, we want to get a copy of these scrolls. We want to see the photographs. We want to see the microfilm. We want to be able to translate these ourselves. And it wasn't until the 90s that you started to see these scrolls published more. But still, what happened in Cave 7? It's been covered up by the Israelis because in 1955, 18 papyri were found. These were Greek fragments, and the title of that scroll was 7Q, meaning it was Cave 7, 7Q, Qumran, 1 through 18. Okay, that's how they number them. So 7Q, 1 through 18 was discovered in Cave 7. These were Greek manuscripts. Now, what on earth are Greek manuscripts doing down in Qumran? What are they doing down there? Now, since 1972, the Israelis have been hiding the truth from you and I, and that is this: that manuscript 7Q5 contain parts of Mark chapter 6, verse 52, verses 52 through 53. And why hasn't this been announced? Why hasn't this been announced by the mainstream media? Because who controls the mainstream media? Who controls it? Oh, you can't say that. You just go and look. Be honest. Let's be honest. Go and look at the last names of those who control the mainstream media and the publications. You go and find out what their last names are, and then tell me if I'm being a conspiracy theorist. But then, not only that, 8 more New Testament fragments were found also. 7Q4 was 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, chapter 4, verse 1. And then we find that there was 7Q6, which was Mark chapter 4, verse 28. Then we find there was manuscript 7Q62, which was Acts chapter 27, verse 38. Then we find manuscript 7Q7, which was Mark chapter 12, verse 17. Then we find 7Q8, which was James chapter 1, verse 23 and 24. Then we find manuscript 7Q9, which is Romans chapter 5, verse 11. And then we find 7Q10, 2 Peter 1:15. And then we find 7Q15, Mark chapter 6, verse 48. What in the hell is going on? And it should bring forth righteous indignation. That's why I'm jazzed up right now. Because I didn't know this. Nobody's told me with the lamestream media. Well, why not? Because there is a cover-up going on. Because there is a political entity called Israel that is trying to take over the world just as it was during the time of Yeshua. That's the 30-fold, people. But then there's the 100-fold that are the followers of the Melchizedek that are going to wake up to the ever-present reality that you are the Israel of Eloah. And that Israel is only given to those who have the legal land rights to go there, that will have their captivity released to them when the Jubilee comes forth, which is all about this calendar that we are going to learn about together. Because I'm not going to teach it all to you because I don't know it. But I can tell you the path and we can walk down it together. But I tell you what, it's a narrow one. It's a narrow one. What an amazing time that you and I are living in. How come we didn't know? This was amazing to me when I discovered this. Has anybody heard of that? I mean, is that being broadcast? No. You hear mutterings, and if you dig deep enough, you can find out what actual manuscripts they are. But then what do? What do you think the first thing they do when you start talking about this? They're going to try and shut you down and discredit it and discredit it and discredit it. In fact, the Spanish monk who came across this discovery, I believe his name was Father Callahan, a Spanish monk, had an Irish name, figure that out. Totally tried to discredit him. He came up with this and discovered this in, I believe, 1972. 1972, a Spanish monk brought forth this paper on the New Testament texts in Greek that were found in Cave 7. Amazing, amazing. So there are so many correspondences between the scroll texts and the New Testament. There's words, there's phrases, there's beliefs and practices. Even as I said, there's this messianic leadership, a teacher of righteousness, the Moreh Zadik, who was persecuted and crucified and then was resurrected. And this has been spoken of by researchers who've got hold of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the 90s. But before that, nobody even knew this. So when we read the book of Hebrews, the writer of the book of Hebrews was a Zadokite priest who was in Jerusalem, and he was writing to the Qumran community and reporting to them the goings on of the temple up in Jerusalem to the Qumran community, and he was telling them that it was growing old, near disappearing, and about to become what? Obsolete. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13. It all makes perfect sense because they had one of their own sent up to see what the 30-fold were doing with the Levitical priesthood. And he was reporting back as a Zadokite priest to the 100-fold. It's called the book of Hebrews. It was to the Hebrew community down in Qumran. It's amazing. You see, Melchizedek is the one that brings us the opportunity to enter into the blessings. But first of all, you've got to recognize that the knee-jerk reaction of religion is to keep you in a mixture of blessings and cursings, which is the book of the law, religious system where you are held captive to teachers and men. And they'll regurgitate 19th century covenant theology to you. They'll put it in Hebrewisms, Mishnaic and temple traditions to keep you thinking that it's something fresh. All the time, keeping you captive in the same. It's not going to help you any more than it helped people 150 years ago. Nothing at all. But what is being taught here is a different message, but it's the same message that went forth from Qumran many, many years ago. So the curses are arranged in a series of 5 groupings within our text. John, Steve, next door. The curses are arranged in a series of 5 groupings in increasing severity. This is what you see. First, there is sickness and defeat. Then next, there's famine. And then there's wild beasts to devour you. And then there's going to be a siege. Then there's going to be exile. And then you will see what? Return. We should expect this very same pattern during what's called the tribulation. What we should expect to see is what? First, there's going to be sickness and defeat. Secondly, you're going to see famine. Thirdly, you're going to see a siege. Fourth, you're going to see exile. And then finally, there will be a return to the Kadosh Adamah, the Holy Land. Adamah, him that came up out of the ground. But when you look at the curses, you can see that they go on and they go on and they go on, but the curses are attached to the book of the law. The blessings are attached to the book of the covenant. It's interesting, if you go down, in fact, to verse 27, you'll see the timing of everything. In verse 26, the timing in our text, you will see the blessings and cursings. In verse 26, it is written, "And when I have broken the supply of your lechem," your bread, 10 women shall bake your lechem in one oven, and they shall deliver to you your lechem again by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. What is this speaking of? This is speaking about 10 Israel will be served up bread. The northern tribes, those that were exiled, they'll be served up bread, but they will still go hungry because they were never instructed to re-enter the covenant. And that's exactly where the Messianic movement is today. 10 Israel is being served up bread. It's 19th century regurgitated covenant stuff thrown in with Hebrewisms to keep everyone Hebraically happy. But you know what? What is it producing? They're still hungry because they're still not being taught to re-enter the covenant. Stay in the book of the law. You can do them both. It's a mixture. It's all mixed up together. Where does that come from? Where does the teaching of mixing come from? Satan. But Yahweh says there's laws, Torah of Kilayim. You shall not mix. Yahweh is a Yahweh of distinctions, of separating and making divisions in his word and in his people's life. 30, 60, 100-fold. He's not mixing it all up. Satan wants to mix it all up so nobody is paying attention. But if you will not listen to me, verse 27, but you will have your halakha, your walk, your way in the path contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you also, and in fury. And even I will chastise you 7 times more for your sins. And this is what leads me to the urgency of having to address timing, seasons, calendars. Because even with this, you can turn to Yehezkel, Ezekiel chapter 4. And you can see it is written, this will be a sign for the house of Israel, to Ezekiel. Lie on your left side and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel upon it for 390 days. I have laid upon you a day for each year of the exile. You see, the Assyrians, they took Israel captive in 721 before the Common Era. 390 years times 7, 7 times the punishment, right? Vayikra 26 tells us that you would then have 2,730 years of captivity, which would bring you to when? About 2010, 2012 of the Common Era. And people are going to start to wake up as the scrolls have come up out of the ground, are being published. People are going to wake up and go, you know what? I don't want a mixture of blessings and cursings in Yeshua. I want the blessings. I'm the people of the blessings. He came to give me life more abundantly. He said that if I came to him, I would not hunger and I would not thirst and I wouldn't have to be a slave to men's teachings, doctrines and dogmas. And I get so riled up because I spent the past 10 years with itchy ears listening to all the Hebrew roots nonsense, realizing that this is about making disciples after yourselves as you build up your own kingdom. Yet there's people in the wayfarers going hungry, starving, and homeless. And you know what? I'm thinking maybe it's time we go and turn and do evangelism on the streets. Because you know what? If you're hooked up on drugs, prostitution, and your life is wrecked, maybe you need to hear the message of a covenant. Not about the greasy grace, that it's all about the blood and you can take Jesus and then, we'll give you some money so you can go and get your Thunderbird liquor or whatever your malt is. No, it's if you really want him, you need to come into covenant, and maybe that will restore your broken life. With your wife, with your kids, with your employers. But you have got to come and enter into covenant. Maybe we need to go to the highways and the byways. Because I think the religious people are the 30-fold that don't want to hear the message. But there's a whole group of people that have been fed bread and given a greasy message and it didn't work. But maybe we need to feed them covenant and say, if you want this, we've got the most amazing journey that you can come on, but it comes at a cost, but it's worth it. It's called covenant life. Come into covenant with the Melchizedek, and he will deliver you from your lifestyle of sin. But you've got to walk in the covenant. We've got the framework. We've got the commandments. He's given them to us. Walk in it, and he will get you out of that sin. It worked for me. It worked for me, and I know it's worked for a lot of you too. You see, some people just don't want to hear, and that is okay. It's meant to be that way. It's meant to be freedom. Freedom for me, freedom for you. And what a blessing that you have been chosen to be that word that produced 100-fold, because it's all about the Melchizedek righteousness. So what we see then, even aligned to the captivity in the curses, we see that the deliverance is around the time that we live in, 2010, 2012, and Yahweh is long-suffering and patient, that our exile is finished. It is finished. And look what it says in verse 41. And that I also have walked contrary to them and have brought them into the land of their enemies. If then their uncircumcised levanot hearts are humbled, and they then accept the punishment of their iniquity, you've got to accept it, then will I remember my covenant with Yaakov, with Jacob, and also my covenant with Yitzhak, Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember. Did Abraham ever know a Levite? Did Yaakov? Did they understand a temple and a tabernacle? No. They never saw it. They never understood. They never were revealed the book of the law, Exodus 24:12, that was added. They lived in the covenant, and if you repent and return, he'll show you what he showed them. But there are others that want to keep you captive. They'll give you some blessing, because you're not going to fall for a bunch of cursing every time you go to a conference, are you? So they're going to dish out some blessing. Oh, man, that's great, cool. But it doesn't satisfy. They got to throw out some blessings, but there's going to be a whole bunch of Mishnaic temple cursings in there. Because the only blessings is when you realize that you are a temple built up of stones through the Melchizedek Mashiach, Yeshua. It says in Ivrim, Hebrews chapter 8, verse 6, but Yeshua HaMashiach has obtained a greater service by which he is also the mediator of a more advantageous covenant that was given as Torah. Now, the Greek word there is nomotheteo, which is spoken of in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. So you've got to cross-reference Hebrews 8:6 with Hebrews 7:11 and realize that this Greek word that is used, given as law, in Hebrews 7:11 is mistranslated in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 6. It has to be translated as given as law or given as Torah, because it says, if therefore were perfection by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the book of the law, nomotheoteo, as in Hebrews 7:11. When did the people receive the Levitical priesthood? Under the Levitical priesthood, they received the book of the law, Exodus 24:12, based upon more advantageous promises. The more advantageous promises are the promises, the covenants of promise, the covenants of promise. For if that first people had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for a second. For finding fault with them, he's not finding fault with covenant Torah. the text qualifies the them. It says, behold, the days come, says the Master Yahweh, I will make a new. It's not renewed. You can't renew. What happened? Oh, yes, perfect. He's doing signs and wonders back there. Thank you. Yes, we're going to take a break, actually, in a little bit for about 5 minutes, just because this is going to be a lengthy teaching, and my voice is not very strong right now because it's not. So we're going to continue for a little bit, then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back. But I think we are up and online this week, are we not? All right, we just put it out there. We just put it up. We know what you're doing. Okay, we published it, so let's just quit the censorship because we'll go round another way, will we not? We will. So today we're up and running. I like it. Sometimes you just got to shine the light in the darkness. Okay, and they back down. That's my philosophy anyway. Oh my goodness. Where was I? Oh yes, he says, behold, the days come, says the Master Yahweh, when I will make a Brit Hadashah. That's a new covenant. That's brand new. Simply brand new. With the house of Israel and the house of Yehuda, not according to the Brit that I made with their Avot, their fathers, in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Mitzrayim. Because they continued not in my covenant, and I regarded them not. They broke the covenant. You see, today, those who don't enter into this covenant, likewise, what will happen? They're going to be discarded just like that generation before. It's the renewed covenant. No, it's not. That's been taught. I believed it. How many of you have heard it? Oh, it's not a new covenant, it's a renewed covenant. You're like, oh, and they get in Brit, Hadashah. Then when you actually break it down, it's like it could mean renewed, but then you look at Galatians and you tie in covenants, and it's like, no, it has to be a new covenant. It has to be renewed because the other one was broken. There is a new covenant of the Melchizedek order that ends our exile and our slavery to the curses. Our slavery to the curses. And when that new covenant comes, both houses will come into the hand of the rabbis. No, they will come into, you're all like, he's really lost it. No, into the hand of the Melchizedek that will make the two one. And we're all talking about all the two houses of Israel. Forget the two houses of Israel. We really need to move past that. That's a 60-fold mentality. It's the one house of Israel. Is a one stick in the master's hand, right? I mean, let's take it another step further. It's not about the two houses of Israel. That's the 60-fold teaching. The 100-fold teaching is the Melchizedek has got the Israel of Eloah restored in his hand. That's what I want to graft into. And that's the day and age that we live in. But you have to take it a step further outside of the religion. Let's continue on in our midrash here of Hebrews. For this is the Brit that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Master Yahweh. I will put my covenant Torah into their mind and write it upon their leaven, their hearts. And I will be their Eloah, and they shall be my people, Ami. And they shall not teach every man his fellow Israelite citizen, and every man his Israelite brother, saying, know the Master Yahweh, for Kol Israel, all Israel shall know me from the least to the greatest of them. Meaning what? Meaning you don't have to go through a human agent. The regeneration process is through the Melchizedek, the Moreh Zadik, the teacher of righteousness. Right? If you've been reborn, it wasn't through some human agent. It was the regeneration that happened through the Master coming in and you supping with him and him supping with you. Right? It's supernatural. You don't need a human agent to receive the Melchizedek. That's what this text means. It doesn't mean that you can't come here and listen to a teaching, for crying out loud, which some people tell you that. No, it's if the true regeneration is through the Melchizedek himself, that you need no human agent. The regeneration process is between Melchizedek and you. That's a reborn experience. You won't need to be taught the covenant Torah because it will be testified by the Ruach HaKodesh that is in you. You'll either agree with it because it's the hundredfold being testified to you, or you won't. You won't need to be taught through a human agent. It'll be placed upon your levanot, your hearts. Verse 12, for I will forgive their unrighteousness, and their sins and their Torahless will I remember no more, in that he says a new priesthood. Covenant is in italics, and it's not in, of course, any of the Greek or Aramaic texts. That was a wake-up call for my Calvary Chapel days. And he made the first old. Now that which is passing away and becoming old is near disappearing. This is the writings and the teachings of the Zadokite priest. At around 70 of the Common Era, he is reporting back to the Qumran community, and he is saying, look, I see it. The 30-fold priestly system that is so corrupted, the Herodian system that is so corrupted. Acts chapter 6, there are priests that are leaving and following the Melchizedek. There are priests that are leaving the temple and they are following the Melchizedek, and this system is becoming old. It's near disappearing. You better get ready, sons of righteousness, sons of the Moreh Zadok, the Melchizedek, get up here from Quran and come and join the battle, because it is the sons of light against the sons of darkness that want to uphold a Levitical hierarchy. There is nothing new under the sun. It's happening today. There is a war against Yahweh through his people, the 30 against the 100, the 60 against the 30 again. And that's what it is. And it's all about priesthood, altar, temple, and sacrifice. And it is being sponsored by a political Israel, just as it was in the days of Yeshua. It is being financed, sponsored, and armed by a political Israel. And when you speak out against it, you better watch out, John the Baptist. Yochanan HaMatbil, you better watch out when you speak out against political Israel. What a wild, wild journey. Let's take a break. And we'll come back in, 10 minutes? 10 minutes, cup of tea.